So, today we're going to talk about a really fascinating figure, a man who had this immense influence, both spiritually and nationally, but held no grand title. A leader who built communities all across Israel, but whose name you might not even know, Rabbi Elisha Vishletsky.
Okay, let's just dive right in with a quote that tells you everything you need to know. A couple of years after he passed away, his closest friends gathered for a memorial, and this is what they said. This was a man who fled from honor so intensely that the very idea of a tribute like this one, well, it would have been his worst nightmare. And that's the central puzzle we're going to explore today. How could a man who avoided the spotlight at all costs be mourned by the highest levels of government when he died in 2019? And how did he have thousands upon thousands of students who saw him as their guide? It's a paradox, and it's one that's definitely worth understanding. So, to really get a handle on this paradox, first, we need to just grasp the sheer scale of his impact. And then, we'll contrast that with his official status, or really, his lack of one. I mean, when he passed away, the tributes just poured in, and they were immediate and profound. We're talking the president, the prime minister, chief rabbis, community leaders. They all spoke about this massive loss to the nation. This was not the kind of farewell reserved for just anybody. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all this high praise, Rabbi Vishlitsky never held a position of formal institutional power. He wasn't the head of some major yeshiva, he wasn't a chief rabbi. He operated almost completely outside of the official hierarchy. And you know, President Rivlin himself totally nailed it. He recalled how the rabbi just actively refused titles. He didn't want to be Rabbi Vishlitsky or Harav Vishlitsky. When he'd meet you, he would just introduce himself as Elisha. His identity wasn't in some title, it was in his name. So that raises a pretty big question, right? If his influence didn't come from a title, where did it come from? Well, the first piece of the puzzle is his unique role as a unifier, a connector of people and ideas. Let me give you a perfect example of this in action. When the flagship religious Zionist yeshiva, Merkaz Harav, went through this really painful split, a new yeshiva, Har Hamor, was formed. And it created this deep wound in the community. Well, Rabbi Elisha was the only rabbi who served as a bridge. He just kept teaching in both institutions. He absolutely refused to choose a side. And the way people described him, man, they used these incredible metaphors. They'd call him the glue holding things together. My favorite is this one, the central bolt of the tabernacle. In the ancient sanctuary, this was a single wooden beam that ran, completely unseen, through the center of all the wall planks, holding the entire structure together. That was Rabbi Elisha, this invisible force creating unity. And his mission wasn't just limited to the religious world. As Prime Minister Netanyahu pointed out, he was weaving the very fabric of the nation together, piece by piece, person by person, connecting secular and religious, north and south, the big cities and the periphery. And look, this whole mission of connection, it wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a physical, nonstop, tireless journey across the entire country. And it was all driven by this radical way he reimagined Israel's social geography. I mean, he literally flipped the conventional map of Israel on its head. He refused to use the term development towns for places out in the periphery. He called them the natural towns because he believed the people there were more authentic, more connected to a natural, healthy way of living. So in his mind, where were the real development towns? Tel Aviv and the central cities. He argued that their residents were the ones who actually needed to develop their inner spiritual selves and break free from what he saw as a superficial external culture. And wow, did he live this philosophy? His schedule was just relentless. His colleagues would say the map of Israel seemed to shrink under the wheels of his car. He could start his day with a lecture way up north in Beit Shean, get called down to Sderot in the south for a mediation in the afternoon, and then show up for a scheduled class in Dimona at 10:30 at night. This incredible drive, it was his entire identity. Late in his life, when he was very sick, the funds for all his travel ran out. A friend had to break the news. There's no more money for taxis. And his response, then I understand that I have finished my mission in the world. His life and his mission, they were exactly the same thing. And you have to ask, what was fueling all this? It clearly wasn't ego or ambition. It came from something else entirely, a deep, almost radical sense of humility. He literally ran from honor his entire life. He basically had this personal code, a system for deflecting honor. His colleagues would share these little details. He would never, ever sit at the head table at an event. He would actively look for a seat in the fifth row from the back. Not the very back, because that might draw attention, but just far enough to disappear into the crowd. And always, he was just Elisha from Jerusalem. He absolutely loved telling this one story. He'd arrive at an event, and his driver, who was often wearing a suit, would get out of the car first, and people would rush over to honor the driver, thinking he was the great rabbi. And Rabbi Elisha, dressed simply, would just kind of trail behind. He thought that was just the best thing ever. He was just some guy who came along. But it is so important to get this. This was not an act. He wasn't performing humility. He genuinely believed that whenever he taught or spoke, he was the one receiving the greater gift. He would constantly thank people for the chance to learn with them, because he felt he was taking more from the encounter than he was giving.
So that brings us to today. How does the influence of a guy like this, a guy who built no big institutions and actively avoided credit, how does that even last after he's gone? Where is his legacy?
You know, his true legacy, you can't measure it in buildings or even in the many books he wrote. You have to measure it in the strength of the communities he nurtured, the leaders he mentored, and the thousands of personal relationships he built and sustained all across the country. And that, right there, that's the living proof of his impact. His students and the community leaders he guided, when they're faced with a tough social or spiritual problem, they still ask themselves this exact question. His worldview, his approach, it continues to guide them long after he's gone. And that, right there, solves the whole puzzle we started with. His immense power didn't come from a title or a position. It came from his radical authenticity and his humility. He didn't lead from the front, giving orders. He empowered people from within, making them feel seen and heard, and connected to something much bigger than themselves.
And his story really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In a world that's so often obsessed with titles and platforms and personal brands, the life of Rabbi Elisha Wislitzky challenges all of us to ask, what does true leadership really look like today? And where do we find it?